And that's the end of the first half. As the teams head to the locker room, the Spartans lead the Bulldogs by a score.
You guys stink.
Geez, Coach, we're only down a couple of points.
No, I mean you guys really smell. You need to hit the showers. And here, I got every one of you new bars of soap from the Sterling Soap Company. Each bar is artisan crafted using natural ingredients and essential oils. They also have shave soaps, colognes, beard balm, and a whole lot more. Now get in there.
But Coach, we have another half to play.
I don't care. I can't stand to be around you.
A few minutes later.
All right, bring it in tight. You guys are still playing terrible, but you're smelling great out there. Now listen, you're going to need to stock up for the rest of the season. We got a lot of tough games left. So go to sterlingsoap.com after the game. That's STIRLING soap.com. You got that?
Yes, Coach.
Great. Sterlingsoap.com on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
They'll tied 17-17, and legendary Georgia field goal kicker who would go on to kick for the Super Bowl winning Chicago Bears, Kevin Butler, attempted a 71-yard field goal to win it, and it came up about a foot short. It was dead on, and it came up a foot short, which because he had hit like a 60-yarder like a couple of times earlier in the season. Now, caveat, this was still the time in which I know you remember this. This was still the time in which kickers used to kick field goal attempts off the tee still.
Yeah.
So that's a little caveat in that, but nonetheless, you can boom that thing for 71 and almost hit it. That is good. So it was a very, very good game, very, very competitive game throughout.
Sports from back in the day. From Atlanta, it's Dana on the mic, talking old school legends, bringing history to life. We go deep like a spiral in the Superdome. Back when athletes left the game due to talking alone. Jordan fadeaways, Jackie in the zone, Ali in the ring, man, he stood all alone. From the Negro Leagues to the ABA, we break it all down, yeah, the classic way. It's Charles from the district, straight out the boot. Southern University pride, rapping truth in the booth. From Baton Rouge to the nation's capital, legends on deck. Yeah, we factual tales of the greats, gold chains and all. Baseball, who dreams in that football brawl? No clickbait, no fluff, just the facts we say. It's historically speaking sports from back in the game. So sit back, tune in, and hit replay. It's historically speaking sports, the classic way.
College football bowl season is here, and this is the time of year where legends are born, where underdogs rise, dynasties crack, and one play could live forever. Hello once again, sports fans. I'm Dana Augusta. I will be joined by my co-host Charles Combs shortly, and you are listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, the podcast that gives you the best of sports from back in the day. In this episode, we are counting down the 5 most memorable bowl games that we have witnessed in our lifetimes. Our list includes a miracle finish that placed a little-known West Coast bowl game and an even lesser-known football program on the map. Also on the list is a couple of ties that includes one in which one of the coaches turned the tie into a charity event. And also we have a couple of wild finishes in perhaps the most prestigious of all the bowl games, authored by the same player in back-to-back years. Also, we're going to send a shout out to a sportscaster who is the lead broadcaster in some of those games that we're talking about, who is considered the voice of college football. We have all of that and more coming up on this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
Hey there. Welcome to Music Meets Sports. where sports legends meet custom soundtracks. Founded by music producer Ronald Tyke Oliver, Music Meets Sports was created to bridge generations, educate fans, and celebrate the greatness of both current and former athletes. We craft original songs about heroes in basketball, football, baseball, boxing, and beyond, highlighting their struggles and victories. Across all musical genres, we reintroduce fans to their favorite athletes in a way they've never heard before. From Babe Ruth to Reggie White, from rising WNBA stars to timeless NFL great stream, or download our music now on Apple Music, Amazon, and Spotify. Visit musicmeetsports.org to explore the catalog, hear new releases, and join the movement that's preserving sports history, one song at a time.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're back here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I'm Dana Augusta, along with my co-host Charles Combs. And right now, we are in the middle of college bowl season. I figured, what better way to really get into bowl season is to talk about our 5 most memorable bowl games that we've witnessed as fans. And you know, as we record this, we are just a few days away from the national semifinals of the college football playoffs. You got the Final Four with Miami, Oregon, Ole Miss, and Chuck, what's the other team that I'm missing? I miss Indiana. Playing for the national, for the right to play for a national championship. And what better way to have a topic like this is our 5 most memorable bowl games that we've witnessed. We have some that's pretty obscure. We have some that's very memorable. We have a couple where we have one in particular where a legendary coach went off victorious. So Chuck, when we started researching this, what were some of the things that you were looking for? What are some of the earmarks of your 5 most memorable?
Most memorable, like coming from the perspective you outlined, most memorable for me as a fan. It may not necessarily be the most memorable to someone else.
Right.
It's my most memorable. And also look for things that were like obscure, because like a lot of our other episodes, like especially for example in our respective top 5 teams of all time, a lot of things that would have made this list were discussed.
Yeah.
So since we had already kind of addressed that a little bit, I kind of had a theme of kind of moving that out the way. But then I also noticed, like for a couple of mine, it was kind of sort of coming out parties, precursors to some of those great things that we did allude to in that episode.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I try to look for as well. Like these games right here was sort of that, in my opinion, were memorable for a lot of different ways, a lot of different reasons. Not necessarily the most exciting, but is ones that I was literally on the edge of my seat. A lot of these were high scoring. As you know me, I love high scoring games, and all of these, with the exception of one, was ridiculously high scoring. There was one that I'm going to get into a little bit later that's absolutely crazy. That basically there was literally no defense played in this game.
What you have, because you have through the years, you and I have talked about a vast amount of different things pertaining to college football and a lot of memories. And I know, like, it seems like you and I kind of differ, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Like, whereas I'm kind of always kind of been more SEC, Big 12-ish, more SEC. I'm kind of more SEC, Big 12-ish.
Right.
You've always been a bit more well-rounded in terms of your in terms of your fandom. For example, you like the WAG teams, like the Holiday Bowl, the Aloha Bowl, the Hawaiis, the BYUs, the Wyomings, and things like that. So I'm very interested to see what you have to say, because I have some suspicions of what you may have, but I really, folks, I'm going to be finding out his most memorable as you find out. I have no idea what he has on this list.
Okay, so with that, I'm gonna start off with my number 5, and we're just gonna do like we normally do. You do my fifth, you do your fifth, fourth, third, all the way down the list. Okay, and I'll go first in this one. Number 5 on my list was played on December 29th, 1982, and this has a backstory. It was the 1982 Liberty Bowl between Illinois and Alabama. And what I remember about this game here was simply this. My grandpa said, you may want to watch this game because this particular coach was coaching his last game. And of course, I'm talking about Bear Bryant. This was Bear Bryant's final game. And Alabama won this game by a final of 21-15 over Illinois. Earning win number 323, his final record of coaching 323, 85, and 17. And just to give you a little bit of a resume of Coach Bryant, 1934 he won a national championship as a player for Alabama. He won 6 national championships as a coach, 14-time SEC champion. 13 of those was at Alabama. Now, Chuck, I'm gonna test you real quick. Who did he win his only other SEC championship for?
They're not a flagship. Well, I remember they're not a flagship SEC team. They were added later on, right?
I don't think they were. I think they might have been the flagship team.
Because I thought he coached in one at Texas A&M. That's what I thought.
But they were part of the Southwest Conference.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like they weren't a flagship; they were added later on.
Right.
So
they're known for basketball. They're known for Kentucky. That's the only SEC.
I thought about that, but I remember because they have a movie based on what he did at Texas A&M. I can't remember what the movie was. It came out like in the 2000s.
Junction Boys. The Junction Boys.
Yes, I remember seeing that, and that's what had me confused a little bit because I know even though Texas A&M is part of the Southeastern Conference now, that didn't come to fruition until around 2010, 2011 ish.
Somewhere up in there. But that's the only SEC
Correct.
championship in football Kentucky has ever won.
Wow,
great
coach.
And as you alluded to, 1956 Southwest Conference champion with Texas A&M, 12-time SEC Coach of the Year, and 3-time National Coach of the Year. Now, coming into this game, both teams had a 7-4 record. This was a down year for Alabama. In fact, they had lost their last 3 regular season games against, including the Iron Bowl of 1982. They lost. Illinois, on the other hand, was in their first bowl game since 1964 when they were led by some linebacker named Dick Butkus. But anyway, the MVP of that game was Jeremiah Castile. If those of you who know, he was the one who caused the fumble and recovered the fumble in the infamous The Fumble 1987 AFC Championship game. Jeremiah Castile was the MVP, picking off 3 passes by a person that we talked a lot about in our last episode, one Tony Eason. So Eason that game, 35 for 55 for 423 yards, 1 touchdown, but threw 4 interceptions. Maybe a little bit of a precursor to his career. But anyway, that's my number 5. The reason why I put this one on the list was because of Bear Bryant. Because my grandfather he didn't really care for Alabama, but he loved Bear Bryant. And I don't know if you remember this, but I remember they used to broadcast back home in Louisiana. They used to broadcast the Bear Bryant Show with sponsored by Golden Flake potato chips and Coke. And he was sitting there talking about the game and what's up. I don't know if y'all got it in Baton Rouge since y'all does LSU, but where we were, we had it. We got it every week talking about Alabama football. And I don't know how that played or whatever, how they was able to do that, but I used to watch it every week back home growing up.
We got some semblances of that, but we also, to my recollection, and it's a little bit before my time, we used to kind of also get the Charles McClendon show, the Charlie McClendon show. And
Charlie
it
Mack.
should have been the Bear Bryant because he used to own Charles McClendon. His name is Charles McClendon Bryant because didn't LSU go like 25 years or something without winning a home game in the Alabama series? They would just come to Baton Rouge and beat them all the time. So, yeah, the Bear was a great coach. And to your point about Tony Eason, dude was a screw-up in college. You know what I mean? So, and it's just kind of funny how more than anything in the NFL, not getting too far off topic, the tape doesn't matter as much when it comes to the quarterback position.
Right.
You know, and things like that. They always try to project where he's going to be. But like a lot of times, you know, the old adage is, if you know what's going to happen in the future, just pay attention to what's already happened. That's usually a pretty good indication. So, great pick.
Yeah, 1982 Liberty Bowl, and that's one of those bowl games that kind of gotten swept under the rug over the years, you know, because they would move the date from this day to this date, but there was always a staple in my house. You know, my grandpa, who was a big college football fan, that was one of the games that we would watch every year on the old Mizzlou television, on the Mizzlou Sports Television Network, if you remember that. You know, the old Mizzlou. You remember that?
We had a version of that, but ours was called Jefferson Pilot.
Yeah, there you go.
We called Jefferson Pilot, and you remember this a name that everybody should remember. One of the flagship, the main man at Jefferson Pilot was none other than old Louisiana native Tim Brando.
Tim Brando, right? That's right.
Yes, sir.
Tim Brando.
Yes, sir. And Liberty Bowl was in Memphis or Little Rock.
Liberty Bowl is in Memphis.
Okay, that's what I recall. Is that still ongoing, or is that extinct? Because I don't hear as much about it anymore.
It still goes on. It's still taking place. I forgot who was in it this year, but yeah, the Liberty Bowl is still around. They renovated Liberty Bowl Stadium. That was where the Oilers started when their first season in Tennessee. That was their first year in Memphis, and their first year in Tennessee. That's where they played their home games, at Liberty Bowl Stadium. So. Okay. So the number 5 is the 1982 Liberty Bowl for me, Bear Bryant's final game. So who you got at number 5?
Number 5 for me is none other than the 1984 Florida Citrus Bowl between Georgia and Florida State. You know,
that sounds like a good matchup there.
Yes, it was. You know, Florida State went to the game 7-3-1 under the legendary Bobby Bowden, whose name speaks for itself. You know,
yes,
anything that can be done in college football, he's managed to do it. And then reason why I picked this game was Georgia was 7-4 under a very underrated coach. He was a legendary at the time, but he's gotten forgotten through the years. And that's one legendary fellow college Hall of Famer, Vince Dooley. They were 7-4, you know, and, you know, of course, you know, he coached Georgia from 64 to 1988, and he also served as the athletic director of the institution from 1979 to 2004. And he coached 25 years, compiled a 201, 77, and 10 record. And, you know, he won 10 SEC titles and also a 1980 national championship headlined by none other than the legendary Herschel Walker, College Hall of Fame and Heisman Trophy winner. And then he was also inducted in the College Hall of Fame in 1994. So, you know, as you mentioned, this is a very good matchup. And kind of just for context, these, you know, back then, 7-4, 7-3, 8-4, you know, that was good because, you know, everybody could win the championship, and generally national championship was voted on by the sports writers anyway, so it wasn't decided on the field. So, you know, these were good years. If you got to a good bowl game, especially a New Year's Day bowl, you've done your job. So in this game, you know, like you mentioned, it was a great great matchup. You know, Florida State, and it was just filled with a lot of errors. They had a total of like 8 fumbles, 2 lost by both teams.
Wow.
You know, it was fairly even, 18 first downs for Florida State compared to 15 for Georgia. The yards were fairly close and all of that. So it was just a back and forth battle throughout. And the thing was, they figured out that, I'm sorry, the game is most memorable for the final play of the game.
Okay.
They were tied 70. They were tied 17-17. And legendary Georgia field goal kicker who would go on to kick for the Super Bowl winning Chicago Bears, Kevin Butler, attempted a 71-yard field goal to win it. And it came up about a foot short. It was dead on, and it came up a foot short, which because he had hit like a 60-yarder like a couple of times earlier in the season. Now, caveat, this was still the time in which I know you remember this. This was still the time in which kickers used to kick field goal attempts off the tee still.
Yeah.
So that's a little caveat in that, but nonetheless, you can boom that thing for 71 and almost hit it. That is good. So it was a very, very good game, very, very competitive game throughout. And it's most noted for that final play, the 71-yard field goal attempt to win it for Georgia, but it resulted in a 17-17 tie.
Wow, 17-17 tie for a memorable game. That's a really good one. Vince Dooley, for whatever reason, and those of you who don't know, don't listen regularly, I am based in Atlanta, but Vince Dooley's name here in Atlanta has not been forgotten. It may have been forgotten nationwide, but here, Vince Dooley, Kirby Smart is the coach right now for Georgia, but they play their games at Vince Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. Okay, that's the official name of the Georgia Bulldogs stadium, and a lot of the people still trying to dry their tears from them losing the Sugar Bowl to Ole Miss. But anyway, you had two heavyweight coaches going at it, Vince Dooley and Bobby Bowden, and to come up with a 17-17 tie, and then attempting a 71-yard field goal in the heat and the heavy air of Orlando at the Florida Citrus Bowl. And coming up just a foot short. That is a real Herculean effort by Kevin Butler. I kind of remember this game vaguely. I remember hearing about it, but I don't remember watching it. But hearing that, I want to go back and watch this game. I just want to see what the announcers were. If you probably can find it somewhere on YouTube. I would not be surprised if you could. But yeah, I'm curious to watch this game again. I'm curious to watch this game because I don't think I've ever watched it. That was in '84, right?
It was in 1984. I think which is what I hate about bowl games. I think it was for the '84 season, but at the outset of '85, which is what I hated about bowl games because when I was trying to pare this down for the year in the bowl, it was like, geez, and just for grins, to announcers, you remember being a San Diego Charger fan for sure.
Yeah,
Don Creaky and Bob Trumpy.
Yes, sir.
Was on the call for NBC.
Yep, that's it. Now, moving on to number 4. My number 4 is the 2011. You want to talk about out of the way bowl games. The 2011 Valero Alamo Bowl between Baylor and Washington. Now, this was on the list. And before I get into it, you have to remember, this was a bowl game. This was not the championship game of the Maui Invitational. This was a bowl game. The final score, the game was played December 29th, 2011, featuring recently minted Heisman Trophy winner Robert Griffin III. Final score, Baylor 67, Washington 56. This is still the highest scoring regulation bowl game ever, meaning this game did not go to overtime. This was all in regulation. You had combined 1,397 yards of total offense, most points scored in a single bowl game, which lasted for only 6 days because West Virginia beat Clemson 6 days later in the Orange Bowl 70-33. Baylor had 777 yards of total offense. And Baylor running back was named the most valuable player, Terrence Ganaway, 200 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. And all 5 of his rushing touchdowns were in the second half.
The tackle anybody.
Quick note about this game, which was very interesting. Of course, there was some fallout from this game. Washington's defensive coordinator, Nick Holt, defensive assistants, Mike Cox and Jeff Mills were fired after the game. This game had literally no defense at all. And I remember watching this game. I had just moved to Atlanta. And I had never really seen too much of Robert Griffin III. Never really seen too much of him, at least in live action. So I said, okay, let me see what this guy's about. So I sat down and watched. At the end of the first quarter, Chuck, it was 21-7. Baylor was up 21-7. Then Washington would score on 4 straight possessions. When both teams went into halftime, it was 35-24. Okay. Washington gets the second half kickoff. First play of the second half, 80-yard touchdown pass to Jermaine Kearse, later star of the Seattle Seahawks. Then it goes back and forth. Baylor would score 2 back-to-back touchdown possessions. One of them was an 89-yard touchdown pass. Then Baylor, to cap off the scoring, would take the lead midway through at the end of the third quarter by a score of 53-49. They take the lead. We haven't even gotten into the fourth quarter yet, and it's 53-49. Fourth quarter, Washington scores to retake the lead 56-53, and then Baylor with back-to-back touchdowns by Ganaway. The last one, a 43-yard touchdown run, giving Baylor a 67-56 win. All of this, mind you, in regulation. There was no overtime. There was no need for overtime. But then again, you really think about it, there was really no need for defense. There was no defense at all played in this game. I went back and watched this game, and it was like a tennis match. They would score, Baylor would score, Washington would score. Baylor would score, Washington would score. And those are the kind of games I like. But it's like the old adage that I tell Nikki all the time. Just because I like vanilla ice cream doesn't mean I want to eat it out of an oil drum. Okay? This was just too much offense.
Wow. So, so in other words, the ball boy in the net patrol for the behind the uprights for the extra point got as much work in as some of the players did.
That's it, exactly.
Busy. Was this the year in which RG3 won the Heisman Trophy, or was this like another season? Okay, great. Because
just won the Heisman.
I remember the score. I didn't watch it, but I remembered the score, and I just remembered, and I just assumed that he had lit it up, with the amount of points that was scored. I didn't know that the running back had went off, but obviously he probably had an impact on that because they had to account for him, which led to numerous openings for the running back. And then speaking of the UW assistants, that I know as they were one of my teams for the top 5 all-time greatest football teams. They have always had a big-time tradition and reputation of ferocious defense.
Yes.
And where did that go? And you're right. They were right to fire him, and I'd have made them pay for their own ride home because you're not coming with us, So
right.
This just seems like, so it's just one of those things where it just seems like they weren't putting players in the right positions and just are utilizing their players to their strength, or some of the recruiting talent was low. It's a combination of all three.
I mean, it was fun to watch that game if you like offense like I do. I love offense. I love high scoring. And from this point forward, you're going to see a common theme in my list where we're going to have a lot of high scoring. But there's such a thing as too much, and it was like whoever had the ball last was going to win the game. But as it turned out, Baylor scored, took the lead. Washington They tried to go for it on fourth down. They didn't make it. Baylor got the ball back. First play of the next drive, 40-some-yard touchdown run by Ganaway to put the game away. So that's where that's where I am at number 4. That game was just so crazy, and the announcers and the game itself took like close to 3.5 hours to play because there was just so many big plays, so many clock stoppages for field goals, and for first downs and touchdowns and change of possession and all of that. So it was a fun game, but it was a long game, but it was also so much fun, for me. It was just so much fun.
With what, over north of 130 points scored, because I'm pretty sure that the over-under probably got crushed, because even with those two teams, a high over-under is sometimes like 77 or something. No one could have foreseen like in excess of 130, 140 points scored between both teams. There's no way.
So that was my number 4. So what was your number 4?
My number 4 game was the 2005 Capital One Bowl between one LSU Tigers and one our Hawkeyes. And I know people are like, okay, I know you guys have Louisiana roots, but what's the significance of this? Tell you, this was the final game at LSU for Nick Saban as the LSU head coach. Now, going into the game, there was a lot of controversy, a lot of scrutiny. And, like, for example, he had been courted, he was they had won the national BCS title the year before, split with USC. And he had begun to build a perennial power in Baton Rouge. But then Wayne Huizenga and the Miami Dolphins came a-calling, and then, I still famously remember, because I was still living in Baton Rouge at the time. I still famously remember, because this was the 2004 season, but January 1st, 2005. I still remember Nick Saban like, well, I have not talked to Miami. I have not talked to any of them. I don't have any indications of that, right? Any indications of interest with them or anything. Simultaneously, these people, WBRZ and WAFB Channel 9 in Baton Rouge, they have a helicopter at Ryan Airport, the Baton Rouge Airport. They say, looking live, there was a big jetliner, a private plane, just chilling at the airport with the Miami Dolphins icon on it, which proved that was a lie. So while he was saying he hadn't talked to him, they're like, he's lying. They're here. You know what I mean? So he went back and forth. He wasn't leaving. And then pretty much the morning of, he informed the players that he was, in fact, resigning at LSU and moving on to coach the Miami Dolphins in the NFL. So going into the
game, which was an unmitigated disaster.
Correct. So going into the game, LSU was 9-2, ranked 12th, and Iowa was 9-2, ranked 11th. LSU was favored by 7, and obviously, with that news that morning, LSU was not ready to play. They sleptwalked through the first half pretty much. Iowa had 2 block kicks. They couldn't move the ball. They started off with Marcus Randall at quarterback. He was getting sacked left and right. He wasn't getting rid of the ball. But then miraculously, at halftime, they were only down 14-12 thanks to 2 field goals by Chris Jackson and big old name you remember, I'm sure, big old Allie Broussard, 74-yard TD run. But then in the second half, he switched out Marcus Randall at quarterback in favor of Jamarcus Russell. Yes, that Jamarcus Russell. That was number 1 pick. The man that don't read any tapes, that don't watch film or anything. So he led them back. They were down 12 in the fourth, and he led them all the way back, punctuated by a 3-yard pass to Skylar Green with 45 seconds remaining to go up 25-24. But, LSU, they had one final play on the clock. Iowa had the ball. Drew Tate, he had the ball. and he threw a 56-yard pass as time expired and to win the game. And no, it wasn't a Hail Mary. For some reason, LSU was running single coverage. I mean, on the last play of the game, I don't know what the hell was going on. They were running single coverage because normally you would just send everybody back and just make sure nobody gets behind you. But lo and behold, he sees someone streaking that's gotten 20 yards behind the safety, and he catches the ball and runs. Warren Holiday runs it in from 56 out as time expires. Last play of the game, Iowa wins 30-25, and that concludes the Nick Saban era pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching that game, Chuck, and it was like, you were right. First of all, I can understand you being physically dominated by a Kirk Ferentz team at Iowa. I can understand that because Iowa is the personification of Big Ten football. They will punch you in the mouth, but Kirk Ferentz's offense is as antiquated as a typewriter. I mean, you know what they're going to run. You know exactly what they're going to run. It is one of the most non-imaginative offenses in college football. Even in 2005, it was unimaginative. And LSU got all of these athletes and stuff. And I think it was one of those things where, if you remember, like going into college basketball, you have a team like Princeton that runs the quote-unquote Princeton offense that uses a team's athletic ability against them, their athletic superiority against them. This is what Iowa did. Okay, they slowed the game down, and they scored on, and then plus they took advantage of LSU's quote-unquote sleepwalking through the game because of the news that Saban was leaving and stuff like that. And you do stuff like that, announcing something like that they probably had an idea of what was going on heading into that game. But still, that's a very fine line because it just depends on how your kids are going to react. You got some that's going to be fired up. Let's just send coach out a winner or stuff like that, which leads me to believe that maybe, possibly, do you think that Saban might have been lying to them too?
I think he was, or at best, he was withholding information from them.
Right.
And then I think they're kids, and I think it would be tough for us as grown men. But I think it was more of they were heartbroken,
right?
Because they know that they were building something special. They were on the verge of building what he wound up building at Alabama. They were on the verge that should have been them. Right. And they were on the verge of that. And to tell you how much he had built 2 years later, they were able to still win the title despite Les Miles being the coach. He tried his damnness to make sure they lost it, but they still managed to win it, because they looked up and got into the title game despite 2 losses. But most of those players that was on that team were recruited by Saban, and just look at this list of NFL players that they had. And I'm just going through a few right quick. They had Joseph Adai, Matt Flynn, Jamarcus Russell, Dwayne Bowe, Early Doucette. All of them were NFL players.
Yeah.
And that's not even counting the defensive side of the ball. And it's like you should not be struggling with Iowa, especially to your point, with the athletes that they have. But I still remember at the time, I was working at a call center at the time, and I was the supervisor, so I was nice enough to bring the TV out and let everybody watch the game.
There you go.
This was a place that used to, like, when you see the Billy Blake's Tybo commercials at night, you see the Showtime rotisserie machine at night. You see the Time Life CD collections, the greatest 80s hits at night. We took calls and sold all of that stuff.
Wow.
So we're sitting there watching the TV as Drew Tate slings the ball. And I mean, it's a floor probably about 600 people, full of 600 people, because it was the middle of New Year's Day. And this was still in the days where you predominantly order products, you could, the internet was around, but you still mostly called the 1-800 numbers for
Right.
those sorts of things, as opposed to ordering them online as we do now.
Yeah.
So the entire thing erupted. I mean, people were throwing headsets, just everything, you know what I mean? And it was just kind of like, the first half was kind of like a funeral because Saban was leaving, and
Right.
we were all afraid that they would revert back to, LSU was second, third tier program at best prior to Saban's arrival, and they thought that they would revert back to that. Now, for the most part, they haven't, but they've still had some ups and downs. But that was a sad day.
Yeah. And now the 2000, what bowl game was that again?
The 2005 Capital One Bowl.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because that bowl game had gone through so many names.
It used to be the Citrus, then it went to Capital One, then it became the Citrus again.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the one in Orlando. That was in Orlando, yes. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
Now, my number 3 game took place, and this is the earliest on my list, December 19th, 1980. It was the 3rd annual Holiday Bowl between BYU and SMU. It was on the, once again, Mizzaloo Sports Network. It was the 3rd annual Holiday Bowl. BYU, they call it, nicknamed it the Miracle Bowl. BYU 46, SMU 45. Now, before we get into this, Chuck knows the Holiday Bowl is the must-watch bowl game for me every year. There are 2 bowl games I have to watch. It's the Holiday Bowl, and I have to watch the Rose Bowl. Those are the two games I have to watch. If I don't watch any other games all year, this is the one I have to watch. I have to watch the Rose Bowl, but most definitely the Liberty Bowl. I mean, the Holiday Bowl. I don't know why I got the Liberty Bowl on my mind, but the Holiday Bowl. And the Holiday Bowl got its reputation of high-scoring, crazy endings from this game right here.
I know when I first met you, you just loved the Holiday Bowl. You always loved the West Coast teams, the BYUs, the Wyomings, the San Diego States, the UCLAs, the Hawaiis, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being a crazy game, because it was Jim McMahon versus what's the dude that coached the Colts? Oh man,
Ron Meyer. Ron
Meyer in the Pony Express, the salt and pepper backfield of old Craig James. We talked about him a lot in our last episode, and
the sophomore from Sealy, Texas, named Eric Dickerson.
Yes, sir. Now I remember that game. I watched that game.
Now we're gonna go through, just gloss over the first half. Okay, we're gonna pick up the action with 4 minutes to go in the game. Okay, the 4 minutes remaining in the game, the score SMU was up 45-25 with 4 minutes to go. This was the 3rd year in a row that Brigham Young was in the Holiday Bowl. 3rd year in a row, and they had lost the previous 2 games, the 2 years. They had lost. They had never won a bowl game in the history of the program. Never won a bowl game, even with the great quarterbacks and the great teams they had at BYU, going all the way back to Virgil Carter and Mark Wilson and Gifford Nielsen. They had never won a bowl game. With 4 minutes to go in the game, BYU is down by 20. The comeback begins. Jim McMahon throws a touchdown pass to Matt Braga. Throws a touchdown pass to Matt Braga to cut into the SMU lead. Then BYU gets the onside kick, drives down the field again, and scores on a 1-yard touchdown run by Scott Phillips, making the score 45-39. Now, they kick the ball off. They tried another onside kick, but they don't get it. So BYU has all of their timeouts remaining. So they have to run plays. They can't just kneel on the clock. They have to run plays. They go 3 and out, and BYU forces the Mustangs to punt. The punt is blocked by Bill Shefflin, and he recovers the ball. Then after a couple of Jim McMahon incompletions. They're facing a 3rd and 10 with 3 seconds left. With that, McMahon drops back to pass, scrambles a bit, fires the ball deep into the end zone from about 45 yards away. Tight end Clay Brown reaches up. It basically blocks out the entire defensive backfield for SMU, makes the catch in the back of the end zone for the touchdown, but that only ties it. They need the extra point to win it. Now, everybody's going crazy on BYU sideline because they came back from 20 points down to have a chance to take the lead with no time left. So the kicker, Kirk Gunther, comes on and kicks this clutch extra point to give BYU the Holiday Bowl win and the first win in the history of the program, winning this one 46-45. BYU scores 21 points in the final 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Jim McMahon, 32 of 49, 446 yards passing. He was the game's co-MVP. Craig James, 225 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. Eric Dickerson, 110 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. That game was a shootout and put the Holiday Bowl on the map. So that's my number 3.
So they ran for over 300 yards and 5 touchdowns and lost the game.
Yes.
That Don Ron Meyer, boy. How do you lose? You're up 20 with 10 to go with 2 would-be Hall of Famers had Craig James not wrecked his knee because he was well on his way too. And it's like, how do you lose that game? And I still remember that game. He threw it, and I remember, I'm not going to lie, unlike you, I hated BYU, unlike you. They jumping around and just, it's just like, man, come on, this dude, because I liked Eric Dickerson, and, I like the fact that I used to like, back then, I used to like running backs and running the football, not all that passing and all that. But it was a great game. The old legendary coach Lavelle Edwards, he just he managed to get it done, and to your point, that put the Holiday Bowl on the map, which was the first of many just wacky and wild games and finishes for that particular bowl, which, to your point earlier, made it must-see TV.
Yeah, I mean, that game there, it was like I went back and watched it in preparation for this. I went back and watched it, and that was just, me, I love passing. It was like the two. If you run the ball for over 300 yards, the chances of you winning the game is like 95%. If you run the ball that much for that many yards, you're gonna win the game more times than not. 99% of the time. But this is the 1%. This is the 1%. And then Lavelle Edwards, when everybody was going crazy on the sideline, Lavelle Edwards was just looking around at each other, looking around like, okay, what y'all so excited about? We still got an extra point to kick,
And because it kind of illustrates the importance of all 3 phases of the game, and even the phases within the phases, as in punt protection. Something as simple as punt protection. We're not asking you to boom a punt out of here. Just get the punts off and we win the game.
Yeah.
You could manage to do that not once, but twice.
Yeah.
You deserve to lose, or you're better off going for it on 4th down with that running game if you were going to do that, So that
they went for it. Well, let's see. They tried to punt on 3rd, and it was like 3rd and 5. Okay, with Craig James and Eric Dickerson running the ball, right? You get a 1st down, that's game. You can just run out the clock because BYU by that time was out of timeouts. That's why they call it the Miracle Bowl, because they had an onside kick. They recovered the onside kick and scored the touchdown to get it closer, to make it 43-30, to make it, 40? I'm looking back at my notes, to make it 45-39. Okay, so you're down 6 at that point. Okay, 3rd and 5, you're right at midfield, right? So what do you do? Do you go for it? If you don't make it, you got a field goal right there. But if you punt the ball away, you punt it deep, but you're telling everybody, dude, they're coming. They're sending everybody. They probably sending Brigham Young himself up to try to block the kick. Okay. They blocked the kick. When they blocked the kick, it was like, you got to remember, I'm 7 years old watching this game. And I was like, I could not believe this. I mean, this is all the stuff that I was watching was all new to me. This was completely new, as a 7-year-old. And then here, big man drops back with that blue number 9 jersey, like it was falling off of him, and he throws the ball deep. And then Clay Brown jumps up and catches it for the touchdown to give them the win. And we give them the tie at least, and the extra point gives them the win. And that was just a crazy game. And that would pretty much set the mode and set the tone for future Holiday Bowls that would end wild, crazy, high-scoring games in San Diego.
Wow. And those endings only usually happen on TV. I'm talking about Friday Night Lights, the TV series.
Right.
Matt Saracen and Smash Williams, baby. Shout out.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Dillon Panthers, man. But anyway, I don't understand. I know we weren't professional players, but I don't understand how people like us can have more sense than people who get paid large sums of money.
Right.
We used to play by 12s, team win, team that loses off. It's 11-11. One thing that wasn't going to happen, we wasn't going to let the scrub decide it.
Right.
The ball has to go to a baller. If he misses it and we lose, fine, I can accept it.
Right.
But usually some old scrub, they go Carlton Banks and try to jack the shot up and miss the whole goal. Then we leave, we lose. Me, I'm ready to fight now. You know what I mean? Dude, what the hell you doing? But I'm just saying that to say, dude, you got it 4-5. Did you say they punted on third down?
They went 3 and out.
So they went 3 and out and 4th and 5. Bruh, give the ball to the dogs.
Yeah.
Don't let the scrubs decide it. If you lose, you go to James Dickerson and you lose. Hey man, we shot our best clip and we came up short. But you don't want to lose like that. No.
So that was my number 5. What was your number 5? I mean, number 3.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Number 3 is none other than the 1988 Sugar Bowl, Auburn versus Syracuse.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was the Auburn versus Syracuse Sugar Bowl. Let me get my screen right if I can get it. We had the old legendary coach, another legendary SEC coach who kind of gets lost in the shuffle. Old Pat Dye.
Pat Dye, yeah.
Pat Dye. Coach Bo Jackson, Brent Fullwood. He's old name, big time baller. Y'all might not remember. Old Lionel Little Train James.
Of course, Lionel Little Train James. He also coached James Brooks.
Yeah, James Brooks. He had some ballers, and then Syracuse was coached by another great coach, Dick McPherson. Yep. Auburn went to the game ranked 6th with a record of 9-1-1, and Syracuse went into the game ranked 4th, 11-0, but they were independents at the time. They weren't in the Big East nor the ACC at the time. That was when I think Notre Dame obviously was independent. So was Florida State. So was Miami. So was Clemson. They had a lot of independents in those days. But anyway, Auburn was favored by 2.5 points. And, the game, like usual, was at the Superdome in New Orleans. And they thought it would be a tight game, which it was. And it went back and forth. No team could really pull from the other. Auburn opened the scoring with Lawyer Tillman. Boy, that's a name from the past.
That's a name.
Boy, I haven't said that in a long time. I remember him.
He was
a jump ball specialist. I remember
Lawyer Tillman.
Yeah, from Jeff Berger. I could have swore Reggie Slack was the quarterback, but
I think that was a little bit before Reggie Slack.
Yeah,
a little bit before Reggie
Slack.
Slack.
Watching this game, but I thought Reggie Slack was the quarterback. But then second quarter, Deval Glover got a 12-yard pass from Don McPherson, who wound up being the runner-up for the Heisman Trophy that year. Then
now that's another quarterback that that has fallen through the cracks. Don McPherson from Syracuse. He was a really good quarterback. When you think of great quarterbacks from Syracuse, the first person, of course, you think of is Donovan McNabb. But he was before McNabb, and I mean, really good quarterback. Really good running quarterback. and was just a big, strong quarterback with a strong arm, and bruh, he was a dog. To use your terms, he was a dog.
And they kind of like in a lot of ways, to your point, Dana. This Syracuse team kind of put the Syracuse football program.
Yeah, because they had gone down for a while. It had gone down for a while because they hadn't really been relevant since the days of Art Monk. This was I think this might have been before Marvin Harrison, right? This was before Marvin Harrison.
Yeah, Marvin Harrison was with McNabb in the 90s.
Yeah, okay, so, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yes. So he put them on the map, and then also, to your point, in terms of quarterbacks, Don McPherson put Syracuse quarterbacks on the map, because you remember after that, Marvin Graves followed.
Yeah,
Marvin Graves was a pretty good quarterback, and then following Marvin Graves, of course, you had Donovan McNabb, because at that time, like 1988. We're talking Sherman Douglas, Ronnie Cycli, Derek Coleman, Syracuse, Matt Rowe, like
Syracuse basketball.
Syracuse basketball. That's what we're talking about, Big East. But, they put the Syracuse football program on the map. But anyway, they exchanged some football, some field goals. So then in the fourth quarter, they, Lyle for Auburn hit a 41-yard field goal. Then Syracuse hit a pair of field goals. So Syracuse was down 17-14. And this game is most memorable because within the closing seconds, Auburn had driven to the Syracuse 13-yard line with a few seconds left on the clock. And Pat Dye, he opted to go for the tie. He kicked the field goal to tie the game. So Syracuse fans were outraged. So they responded by, talking crap about Auburn, and they radio station, they mailed Pat Dye 2,000 ugly ties, which Pat Dye, being the man that he was, could always turn a negative into a positive. He autographed the ties, auctioned them off, and raising $30,000 for the Auburn General Scholarship Fund in the process. Now, the aftermath of the game, Syracuse remained fourth in the AP poll, while Auburn dropped one spot to seventh. So, it was an evenly played game pretty much, even though Syracuse dominated time of possession. But the game is most noted for that tie, and it's like, okay, from the 13-yard line with Matt Berger as your quarterback, hey man, you gotta kick it. And back then, college quarterbacks, they could throw, but the passing games was not, they was usually just an adjunct to the running game, something that you could play off the running game, hit over the top. But, in terms of schematics and designing things to move the chains or make big plays and big moments like that, no, absolutely not. So Pat Dye, he opted for the tie instead. And Syracuse, the hypocrisy knowing that if the situations were reversed, they would have kicked the ball too.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it with, football in the 1980s, college football in the 1980s, especially in the Southeastern Conference, right? You think back, who were some of the great quarterbacks in the SEC in 1988? I'll wait. There are hardly any.
Tommy Hudson?
Maybe.
And Tommy Hudson, Bucky Richardson with Texas A&M, but they were.
Who's the quarterback for Florida? He went on
They had Curran Bell.
Curran Bell, that's who I thought. Curran
Bell. But they were on probation half the 80s.
Yeah.
He and Galen Hall, they were on probation half the 80s. And then you had, let's see who else. I think Tennessee had Andy Kelly. He was solid.
He was okay. But the point that I'm trying to make though, Truck, is you're not gonna, like, the SEC was not like the WAC, or it was not the Big Ten, or it was, the Pac-10. You wasn't going to be throwing the ball a lot. And to put Berger in a situation for him to win the game with his arm, that wasn't going to happen, especially against Syracuse had a very good defense too. And you wasn't going to try to run the ball against Syracuse. So either throw the ball and try to throw it into the end zone and lose, or bang your head against Syracuse defense and lose, kick the field goal and get a tie. So, okay, let's go for the tie, because you had a very, your quarterback, and again, SEC football in the 1980s. That's basically wishbone, option, out of the eye, fullback, halfback, straight ahead, smash mouth football. That was the SEC in the 80s.
There you go. That was pretty much it.
And then Pat Dye, again, another great coach that doesn't get his due. Another great coach that does not get his due at all. Because he took over for Shug Jordan, in the 1970s. They were always the stepchild to Alabama, and he made them respectable by the 1980s by beating Alabama numerous occasions in the Iron Bowl, with Bo Jackson and crew. So there you go. I mean, this is a really, really good. I remember watching this game, and it was me and my grandpa would be flipping channels between the Sugar Bowl and the Orange Bowl.
Right.
We'd be flipping channels. The Orange Bowl was on NBC. The Sugar Bowl was on ABC with Keith Jackson, who we'll talk about later. So this was some good times, I tell you, man. These are some really good times.
And another caveat, and I think we mentioned it in our all-time baseball episode. You had the American League. The Big Hurt, Frank Thomas,
yes, sir.
Tight end.
Played tight end. That's right. He played tight end.
So
that's right.
It was a great game, and these were the games in which, kind of like, for context, and I know most of our listeners are probably closer to our age, but for some of our younger listeners, this was the age in which bowl games were truly a reward for a great season. You would get a chance to travel different places and play, see different things that you normally wouldn't see. Like a lot of these players, like for instance, like Auburn players, they had never been out of the state of Alabama before. Now you get to go to New Orleans to play a game. Or LSU, like LSU in those days, they went to a couple games and bowl games in Florida and things like that. And then on top of that, it was prestigious because, even though it was an exhibition game, a glorified exhibition sort of. Everybody wanted to put their best foot forward for recruiting purposes, for the purposes of their conference, for bragging rights. There were no opt-outs. There was no sandbagging and lollygagging.
No.
These games were, especially all of the games, because you mentioned the Holiday Bowl, they used to be around Christmas time.
Yeah.
But the January first bowl games used to be bloodbaths because those were the best of the best teams faced up against each other.
Right. Speaking of best of the best, that great segue to my number 2 game. Number 2, January 4th, 2006. January 4th, 2006. The national championship game in the Rose Bowl between USC and Texas is my number 2 game. National championship game, both teams entered the game undefeated. This was the highest rated televised bowl game of all time. 22% of the country watched this game live. It was the third time in the history of the Rose Bowl, which now is over 100 years old. Third time ever where the top 2 teams would face off in the Rose Bowl. The first time was in 1963 between USC and Wisconsin. The other time, 1969, Ohio State against USC. This was the final game broadcast by Keith Jackson. USC comes in with a 34-game winning streak, and Texas had a 19-game winning streak of their own. Now, Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart were back-to-back Heisman winners, and this was considered going into the game as one of the greatest games and one of the greatest teams in the history of college football. In fact, I think it was Kirk Herbstreit said that they were the second greatest team he had ever seen, right behind the 2001 Miami Hurricanes.
Okay.
Most of the people on the ESPN panel picked USC to win in a blowout, except, not so fast, my friend, Lee Corso. Lee Corso said that Texas would win in a close game. And sure enough, Mr. Nostradamus and his headgear was absolutely right. This game was absolutely insane. Again, high-scoring game. Texas ended up winning 41-38 in an absolute classic with a lot of dubious play calling by USC, to say the least.
Yes, and I remember I did not get to see this game because I had just moved to the DC area December 26, 2005. So I just moved here and I was adjusting, and I didn't have a TV. You know how you start out, the humble beginnings. You get your apartment, man. You have an air mattress and a Walkman and some CDs, and you get your
I know, bro. Trust me, I know.
You get your chicken pot pie from the 5 for like 10 for $5. So hey,
bro, you remember when I used to be at Southern eating ramen noodles every night?
So I didn't because I didn't transport all of my stuff from Louisiana yet. I didn't have my TV, and obviously I didn't really know anyone, so I did not watch that game. I didn't have internet coverage nor anything. All I did when I got to work the next day, I heard about how great the game was, and like you said, it was going into the game. It was the rave because it was the literal clash of the Titans. It was the stars. It was the Rose Bowl, which was always my favorite bowl game as well, the Rose Bowl. And it was the stars, just marquee stars on both sides. You're just trying to figure out how it was going to play out. You had marquee stars as the coaches in Pete Carroll for USC, as well as Mac Brown
for Texas.
For Texas. And it was kind of like or Autobot Decepticon. I don't know if you ever seen the 87 Transformers movie.
Of course.
Before.
Well, oh, yeah.
Man for man, the Decepticons are far more potent than the Autobots were.
Yes.
Megatron had Devastator. He had Starscream. He had Thundercracker. He had Soundwave. He had Laserbeak. He had everybody. Whereas the Autobots, man, all they had pretty much, they had the Dinobots that was decent, and they had Optimus Prime. But Optimus Prime was such a dog. That you remember in that movie when he got off the shuttle at Autobot City, he got out there and he whooped he said Megatron got to be stopped no matter the cost, baby. And he transformed and he whooped all the Decepticons by himself, including Megatron. If Hot Rod wouldn't have gotten
involved. You're right.
I still don't like him. But anyway, that analogy fits because, even though Texas had a lot of great players, USC just had a host of future pros, of future Pro Bowlers, but they had the one stalwart, Vince Young. That could make all the difference in the world because he was the best player on the field, so you always got a shot.
Right. I mean, USC scored first, 4-yard touchdown run by Lindell White. Now, Lindell White had a game for the ages in this game. He had 124 yards in this game, rushing. It wasn't Reggie Bush, but Lindell White was the main bell cow for USC in this game. Second quarter, line a 35-yard pass to Red. Now, it wasn't a touchdown, but this was a key play. Lyon throws a 35-yard pass to Reggie Bush. He attempted a lateral for whatever reason, and it was recovered.
I remember seeing that.
And it was recovered by Michael Huff. Had they gone down to score that touchdown, all of Vince Young heroics probably would have been for nothing, But But on the play itself was controversial because it should have been ruled an illegal forward pass. If that was ruled an illegal forward pass, USC would have got the ball back, But the referees missed it, which led to a Texas field goal, made the score 7-3. Texas scored on a 12-yard touchdown run by here's a name from the past, Selvin Young. And then after a Leinart interception, Texas led for the first time 9-7. Then after 3 and out and a bad USC punt, Longhorns had the ball at midfield. 30-yard touchdown run by Ramon Taylor, making the score 16-7 Texas. Then the half would end on a Mario Danello field goal, made the score 16-10 Texas. Now Texas is leading Okay, and there's a little bit of rumbling out there at USC with some Southern California, like, okay, what the hell's going on here? But then again, in the second half, USC turns it on. Grabbed the lead at the beginning of the third, 3-yard touchdown run by Lindale White, second touchdown run of the day. USC retakes the lead 17-16. Texas would score on the next possession, 16-yard run by Vince Young, making the score 23-17. Then USC would answer with a 12-yard touchdown run by, again, Lindale White, his third touchdown of the night. USC regains the lead 24-23. Going into the fourth, USC extends the lead 31-23 with a Reggie Bush 26-yard touchdown run. Now, to this point, I'm thinking it's over. It's over. USC to grab the lead. Vince Young, great player, but I don't know if he has it in him to lead Texas against this powerful USC team that is stacked with future NFL players. But Texas responds. 34-yard field goal makes the score 31-26. Then USC comes back. 22-yard pass to another name, Dwayne Jarrett, making the score 38-26. Now, I know it's over. Okay? But next drive, Texas takes only 2 minutes and 39 seconds off the clock. Vince Young accounted for all 69 yards, both running and passing. They scored a touchdown, making the score 38-33, with just 4 minutes remaining. Excuse me. Then the next Trojan drive. Now remember when I said that dubious play calling? Okay, here's why. A little over 2 minutes ago, USC on the Texas 45-yard line. They go for it on fourth down. They hand the ball off to Lindale White, who's only held to 1 yard, and they turn it over on downs. If I would have faked it to Lindale White and passed it to Dwayne Jarrett or somebody in the flat, because they were looking for that. They were stacked at the line of scrimmage. Why not just play action out of that?
What's the down and distance? You said 4, but what was the distance?
It was 4th and 2.
Okay.
Right. 4th and 2.
Okay.
Texas gets the ball back on downs. They get the ball on Texas moved the ball to the USC 14-yard line, facing 4th and 5. Vince Young drops back, then takes off running, gets a key bot from Justin Blaylock, and gets into the end zone standing up. Vince Young's third touchdown of the night. They go for 2. They make it to make the score 41-38. That's your final. And I will always remember that when Vince Young ran into the end zone, and I could hear Keith Jackson say, "And he got it, touchdown, Texas!" And I was like, "You gotta be kidding me!" But dubious play calling down the stretch, and just a superhuman effort by Vince Young in that game.
Great players make great things happen sometimes. And sometimes Mac Brown was a very good coach because sometimes choke in big games, but he had sense enough this time to ride his horse. However it goes, ride your horse. And he got it delivered for them. He just took over the game, and you remember it was this big thing going into the game where, sort of like in status wise, Reggie Bush, although Matt Leinart was the incumbent Heisman Trophy winner the season before. During that season, Reggie Bush had transcended Matt Leinart during his own Heisman Trophy winning effort during the season. So it's this big thing about whether or not some contended that Vince Young should have been the Heisman Trophy winner himself. So it was like, we're going to find out tonight who is truly, in fact, the best player. And on that night, Vince had the best night. Was he the best? Who knows? Can you prove that in one night? Who knows? But he proved that he was the best player that night, which is what matters most.
Yeah, he proved it on that night. And it was for Texas. It was their, I want to say their 4th ever national title.
I think so.
It was their 4th ever national championship game at Texas. First ever national championship in football for the University of Texas. And Vince Young will forever go down in history in Austin. Now his pro career didn't really add up to what the hype was. But then again, if you look at all the players that was in this game, a lot of people were considering that some of these may end up in Canton, and as it turned out, not really. Nobody really. If you really look at it, because Troy Polamalu was not there at USC anymore. He was already gone. He was already with the Steelers by that time. Lindale White would team up with Vince Young in Tennessee, but his career didn't last long. Matt Leinart washed out in Arizona. Reggie Bush became a journeyman running back. Selvin Young didn't really catch on in the NFL. So it was one of those things where you look at the college players and the players that played in these big, huge games, and sometimes a lot of people place a lot of hype on these players, but they just don't. It doesn't really materialize in the NFL most of the time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those USC players, they were just used to once they got to the league, pretty much on both sides of the ball, they were favored in 11 out of 11 matchups on both sides most days.
Mm-hmm.
Unless, they play a team like Texas or something like that, excuse me. But once they got to the pros, that wasn't the case for Matt Leinart. He played for the Cardinals, enough said, but then Kirk Warner took over and showed him what he was supposed to be doing.
Right,
but
exactly.
Then, and Reggie Bush, he was never really he's never really a bell cow back. He was more of a back that was best served playing off someone else. Like someone else, they wear the front down, pound it out, move the change. Then you slip him in there with his cat-like quickness when they're worn down a bit. Then you can snap off some big plays. Then Vince, I think Reggie and Vince probably both came about 12 to 15 years too early. Now, Vince could have succeeded then, but he had Jeff Fisher as the coach, man. So the dude saved your job twice, and then you threw the man under the bus. And then it's the exact same Jeff Fisher who didn't have sense enough to realize that most Sundays he had the best player on the field in Steve McNair. He handcuffed him, giving the ball to Eddie George all the time. So don't get me started on Jeff Fisher. Don't get me started on him because he's not a good coach. The man saved his job twice, and if I had to play under him, I threw my shoulder pads in the stands too, because that dude is a bum coach, man. But that was a great game, and an all-time memorable game that will always be remembered.
Okay, so that was my number 2 game. What was your number 2?
Like I mentioned at the outset, Dana, part of my list was sort of coming out parties, right?
Okay.
So, as you just alluded to, the 2006 Rose Bowl is the game that everyone remembers because of Vince Young. But my second all-time game is the 2005 Rose Bowl between Michigan and Texas, which was the Vince Young coming out party where he showed that he was a player to be reckoned with on the national stage. Michigan versus Texas, 2005 Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Michigan went to the game ranked 13th, 9-2. Texas went to the game ranked 10-1, ranked 6th. And they had just look at this. They had Michigan had Chad Henning. They had Mike Hart, who I could outrun with one leg at the time. But Braylon Edwards on that side. Then Texas was led by Mike Brown. Mike Brown. What's the dude? Matt. I'm sorry, I'm having the brain fart. You know the coach. I just talked about Mac Brown. That's his name. I'm sorry. Vince Young as the quarterback, and Cedric Benson was the running back. He was on his way to being drafted top 5 in the league and all of that. So this was a great game. First ever game between both schools. As I mentioned before, Mac Brown was coaching the Longhorns. Another forgotten name, and another coach who gets a bad rep because of how his tenure ended, Lloyd Carr. He was a very good coach.
I was about to ask you who was the coach for Michigan at that time.
Huh?
I was about to ask you who was Michigan's coach at
Lloyd
that time.
Carr, very, very good coach. And, he, especially coming behind Bo Schembechler, he managed to win a national title in 97, split with Tom Brady of all people.
Yeah.
And he did a very, very good job. So it was a very closely contested game throughout. It was a situation where these were the days in which sometimes the Big Ten teams would struggle against Southern teams because they didn't have the foot speed to keep up.
No,
You're
right.
That was a key element in the game, and that's something that they've kind of rectified within the last 5 to 8 years. That's something they've seemingly kind of rectified finally. But the game started out with Vince Young, 20-yard run. Then Braylon Edwards, 39-yard pass from Chad Henne to tie it up. Then David Thomas, 11-yard pass from Vince Young to go up 14-7 in the second. Then Braylon Edwards, one more again. 8-yard pass from Chad Henne to tie it up. Then Vince Young, 60-yard run to go up 21-14. Then Steve Preston, you remember that name?
That's another great name. Yeah. Steve Preston.
He played in the league for a few years. He 50-yard pass from Chad Henne to tie it in the third. Then Braylon Edwards, another 9-yard pass from Chad Henne. Why I'm keep saying Chris? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Chad Henne.
To go up 28, 21. Then they tacked on the 44-yard field goal to be up 10 at the end of 3. Then the Vince Young show began. Started out with a 10-yard run, another touchdown. Texas answered with a field goal to go up 34-28. Then Vince Young, 23-yard run to go up 35-34. Then Garrett Rivas, he put him up 3 with 2 to go, giving Vince Young the ball. And he matriculated the ball. Shout out to Hank Stram. Matriculated the ball all the way to the field, all the way up the field to the Michigan 28, which was kind of controversially stopped because he hit a guy for a pass and he fell down at the 28. And time ran out seemingly, and the celebration began by the.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about that.
The lead call, and it was the right call. They were like, not so fast. It's 1 second left, which gave Texas kicker Dusty Mangum. Boy, that's a good name there. Shout out to the American Dream, Dusty Rose. You understand? But he kicked them to win the game 38-37 in a thriller. And I picked this game because, as you mentioned, everyone always remembers the 06 game in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena versus USC, but they kind of overlook this game, which was the national coming out party for Vince Young, and which resulted in him being a Heisman candidate going into the following season. And then just check these numbers out from all these great players. Chad Henne, 18-34. 227 passing, 4 TDs. Braylon Edwards, 10 catches, a $109, 3 TDs. Vince Young, 16-28, 180 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. However, Vince Young, 21 rushes, a $192, and 4 touchdowns.
Dang. For a quarterback.
And Cedric Benson kind of steadied, moved the chains with 23 rushes for 70 yards. It was just a great back and forth game. Even though it was high scoring, it was extremely well played in all 3 phases of the game. And I still remember because I hadn't really watched Vince a lot. And I was just like, damn, this is a bad dude here, man.
Right. I mean, I remember watching that game, and I kept hearing about Vince Young, and back then, I think I was more into college football back then than I am now. I still am into it, but not as much as I was back then for sure. And hearing about Vince Young and stuff, especially where we were in Louisiana, being right there in Austin, I heard so many things about him and things of that nature, but this is when I first saw him play. And I'm saying, boy, if they play USC or if they play somebody like that this team could win a national championship with this guy. If he doesn't get hurt or anything like that, because he seemed like a very steady quarterback with a lot of poise. And I was really, really impressed by him, especially in this game right here. Really impressed.
Yeah, and he just seemed like a guy where the brighter the stage, the more at home he felt.
That's right. That's exactly right, Chuck. I mean, it just seemed like Vince Young was one of those guys that he was just such his play was so charismatic, even though personality he really wasn't. But his play, he was like one of those guys that would come along every now and then that you can't take your eyes off him. No matter what he does, you just can't take your eyes off him. You just couldn't.
Yeah, and he was just a guy where even though he was very, very explosive, obviously,
Yeah.
it was weird. He was never in a rush either. You
No,
know,
that's what makes it so crazy. I forgot who said this, but the one of the things that make a person, and I know I'm gonna butcher this up, but Vince Young had the capacity of making something that looked difficult, make it look so easy and so second nature. Like that run he had against USC for the game-winning touchdown. It was as if it was like, okay, the hole's opening up. I just follow this guy, make a couple of moves, and just walk in. Any other quarterback would have panicked, in that situation. Vince Young was like, "Oh, okay, that's what I got to do. Okay, no problem." And it would score. And same thing against Michigan. This very same thing. This was a national coming out party, like you said, for Vince Young, and it made people pay attention to Mac Brown in Texas finally, because you got to remember back then, Texas would always lose like the most important game of the year. Like right, they would lose the game that would put them on the map, that would put them as a serious contender for a national championship. And up until Vince Young came along, they would always lose a game like that. You know what I mean? And this particular time, this was the beginning of the transformation, so to speak, of the University of Texas of being a top flight program. Now they wouldn't reach these heights again, but they had chances when they had Ricky Williams and when they had Colt McCoy that they had a chance to be national champs, and they just couldn't do it.
it was like several plays, but one play in particular where he would be cornered. And then all of a sudden he's sliding out of there. You're like, how the hell? Because it's not like he's explosive, but not in a hurry. It's like he seemingly is barely moving. Then it seemed like all of a sudden he just slides out into your point guy. Because like the 10-yard run that put him ahead in the fourth, they blitzed him. The D-line had him around the legs. Another guy had him, safety had him around the shoulder pads. He broke the tackle attempt, threw the safety off his shoulder pads. They had three people right there. He juked to the left, juked to the right, seemingly not quick or anything. Then all of a sudden, he's gliding into the end zone and he sticks the ball over the goal line. And you're like, what the hell happened? Or he goes around the end. Everyone has the angle on him. And you're
all of a sudden, they don't have the angle on him.
And then it's like, I can imagine watching it from the sideline. You look like, okay, they got him. Because, from this field view, they got him. You're looking on the other side of the field. Then you look, all of a sudden, he's coming out of the whole fray. You're like, what the hell happened? And it's just like he had several Houdini like escapes in that game, and just was killing them. And then by the fourth quarter, they was just so worn out from chasing him all over the place the entire game, and he was just getting started. So it was just a Herculean effort with yeoman's work. Just tremendous player. Right. So that's my number 2.
Okay, now before I tell you my number 1 game, I'm gonna just do a little quick review of my top 4 up until this point. Number 5, 1982 Liberty Bowl. Number 4, the 2011 Valero Alamo Bowl between Baylor and Washington. Number 3, the 1980 Holiday Bowl between BYU and SMU. And number 2, the 2006 Rose Bowl, USC and Texas. Now, my number 1, I'm going to say it just like this. My number 1 took place on January 1st, 2007. This game literally had everything. underdog. It had an underdog factor, high scoring, trick plays, overtime, a crazy ending, and to top it all off, a live marriage proposal on television. And I'm talking, and Chuck is shaking his head, and and I think he knows what I'm talking about. The 2007 Fiesta Bowl, Boise State versus Oklahoma, January 1st, 2007. First ever Fiesta Bowl played at brand new University of Phoenix Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. What do you remember about that game, Chuck?
That Oklahoma was heavily favored, obviously, for obvious reasons and all of that. But then there was also this thing where, you know, you and I, on a lot of things, we're usually ahead of the curve on things before everyone else picks it up. I was already of the sentiment that Bob Stoops was going to find a way to screw this up, you know, because he had already screwed up a couple, but he didn't get that stigma until a couple of years later. But I already had that sentiment about him at that time. I'm like, despite the fact he has everything, because you remember they beat Florida State, but it was just like somebody had to win that game because it was that bad. And then they no-showed against, you remember they played LSU in the 2003 Sugar Bowl, got ran off the field. Then came right back the next year versus USC and got obliterated. Then it was like, okay, this was his next shot. And the cards were seemingly in his favor. But I'm like, by then, I had seen enough of the track record. I'm like, Bob Stoops, he's going to find a way to lose it. And you know, I'll let you share the particulars.
Okay. This game, from my perspective, was this one, okay? And I'm going to give you a little peek behind the curtain, okay? I was working this job where I had to be at work the next morning for 7 a.m. Not get out of bed for 7. I had to be at work for 7, okay? And I sat up in bed. I'm sitting here and watch this game until I fall asleep, okay? Mind you, this is the last time I had ever watched a game in bed with my wife asleep next to me. And the reason why I don't do this anymore was because of this game, because I woke her up several times in this game because of like, oh my God, what the heck did I just watch? Okay. Like I said, underdog had the underdog factor, had trick plays, high scoring, overtime, a crazy wild ending, and the marriage proposal at the end of the game. Now, Oklahoma was favored by 7.5 points against this unknown team from Boise, Idaho, who played on this crazy blue field up in Boise. No one knew anything about them. They just came out of nowhere to play in this January 1st bowl game, okay? First quarter, 49-yard touchdown pass, Dryzen James from Jared Zabransky, okay? Beat Boise State up 7-0. Next play. So Oklahoma gets the ball back. The second play from scrimmage, quarterback Paul Thompson fumbles it. Again, and Boise State recovers it on like the 6-yard line. Couple plays later, Ian Johnson touchdown. Just like that, Boise State's up 14-0. And Oklahoma hadn't really had the ball. Now, keep going back and forth, okay? It turns into a shootout, okay? Right before the half, second quarter, before the end of the first quarter, Oklahoma gets on the board with a touchdown pass to Manuel Johnson, making the score 14-7. Going into the second quarter, another name that you're very familiar with, Garrett Hartley, kicks a field goal to make the score 14-10. Boise State's next possession, Jared Zabransky, 32-yard touchdown pass to Dryzen James right before halftime. What made this play special was Zabransky was scrambling out of the pocket and at the last second just throws it up in the flat to Dryzen James. James makes a couple of moves and he then takes off down the sideline. I don't know if they even practiced tackling, Oklahoma did, heading into this game, but there were 3 guys that had clean shots at Dryzen James and just could not get him on the ground. Boise State goes into halftime leading 21-10. At this point, I'm thinking we may have an upset on our hands, but I got a feeling that Boise State, the atmosphere and the situation may be a little bit too much for them because they came out of nowhere. Nobody knows who they are, and they playing against powerful Oklahoma with all the tradition and the prestige behind them. Third quarter, first, like the second play of the second half, Thompson throws another intercept. This time a pick six. Marty Tadman runs it back 27 yards for a touchdown, making the score 28-10, which is Boise leading by 18, Boise State's largest lead. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, this game might be over now. But I have a feeling that they might come back. Sure enough, they did. From that point, Oklahoma will score 25 unanswered points, thanks to their running back named Adrian Peterson, who was suspended for the first quarter for I forgot what for, but he didn't play the first quarter, but he came in the second and they just could not stop him. Okay, Adrian Peterson had an 8-yard touchdown run, and then a 5-yard touchdown pass from Thompson to Quentin Chaney, and then just like that, Oklahoma is behind 28-26. Now, here's where it gets crazy. Oklahoma decides to tie the game going for two with a score 28-26. They tried to go for two first try. It was unsuccessful, but Boise State was called for pass interference, so they get another try. Second try, it was successful, but Oklahoma was called for an illegal shift, so they had to go for it again. This time, third try, they go for it, another 2-point conversion, but this time they make it. 2-point conversion pass to Joaquin Iglesias to tie the score at 28. The first play after the kickoff, Zabransky, and I think it must have been some kind of miscommunication on the route, Zabransky throws the ball to the flat, intercepted by Marcus Walker, and he basically goes 34 yards to score, giving Oklahoma the lead. At that point, I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. They had their chance, and they blew it. Little did I know. The next drive, Boise State drives to the 42-yard line. Zabransky gets sacked for an 8-yard loss. Second down, Zabransky pass was dropped. Third down, Zabransky pass incomplete. Facing a 4th and 18. They throw it. Now, Oklahoma at this point is playing a prevent defense, which, to quote my old coach, the only thing a prevent defense does is prevent you from winning. Zabransky throws a pass to Dryzen James. He takes 2 steps and then pitches it off to Gerard Rabb. And he catches it in stride, going full speed, goes down the sideline to score with 7 seconds remaining in the game to tie the game. When I saw that, that was the first time I woke Nikki up. I'm like, oh my God, they ran a hook and ladder, they scored. And it was on 4th and 18. And yes, this is where the fun begins. We haven't got to it. You haven't got to overtime yet, which was crazy. I know you saw this game, Chuck, and I see you grinning. So at this point in the game, what were you thinking?
I was thinking, man, just he's like always, like I told you before, he's just, and maybe I'm giving him too much blame, but how you got your people in the prevent defense, which is fine for a 4th and 18 situation, but you got to have your head on a swivel, man. And they simply ran just a simple hook and ladder and not only pick up 18, but went untouched for 6. And it's just a lack of attention to detail, a lack of instinct. And like you mentioned, in the Big 12 at that time, defense could be optional at times, and it was just like Bob Stoops is getting out coached yet again. That's what I was thinking. And I was thinking, look, you go for 2. You put it all on the line right now. You win or you lose. Don't risk going into an extra period. And then, what old Bud Peterson do?
Now, they kick the field goal. The game is tied at 35. Okay. They decide, I think Boise State wins the coin toss. They'd like to go on defense first. because you get plays from the 25. You see what the defense does. You see what they do, so you can match it on offense. Okay. Oklahoma gets the ball first. First play, Adrian Peterson, 25 yards, touchdown. I'm like, okay, it's going to be one of those overtimes I see. Okay. BSU's possession, Boise State's possession, the Broncos drive to the 5-yard line. Now they're facing another fourth down, this time 4th and 2. They run a halfback pass option from the 2, which literally, if you're a football play caller, that's like a no-no. They hand the ball off to the running back. The running back rolls out, cocks his arm back, throws the pass into the end zone. Derek Schumann makes the catch in the back of the end zone, touchdown, to get them to within 1. Now, what do? Did you go for 1? You go for the field goal, they go for the extra point to tie the game and go into another overtime period where you get the ball first? No. Chris Peterson decides, we're going to go for it. Okay? Then they call this play, they call statue left. You had 3 wide receivers line up on the right side. Nobody on the left. Zabransky drops back to pass 1 step. Looks like he fires it over to the left side, intended for Legadou Nene, future Charger. But he keeps the ball, reaches behind him, switches hands to his left hand, and goes behind his back, hands it off to Ian Johnson, and Ian Johnson literally just walks into the end zone to win the game. Chuck, I was like, I was flabbergasted. Like, I hadn't seen anybody run a Statue of Liberty since maybe junior high, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is how this game ends, on a Statue of Liberty? You got to have some. And then you think about it, the last 3 plays that they ran to score were trick plays. This team will always be in my heart because I am a type of person that love trick plays. Love them. Love to come out of the ordinary. And Boise State, boy, were they out of the ordinary in this game.
That was just a great sequence. I remember watching that game, and they went for it in the last 2-point conversion, and it's just like, to your point, you said he walked in. I don't think it was even anybody from Oklahoma in the screen, man. It just, that's how wide open it was. And that's just a gross lack of gap integrity and discipline. It's like how you got to keep that backside, because even if you try to get over, you can't get over there and defend that pass,
Yeah.
You got to stay home. And the guy just walked in, and it's just like, and I don't want to harp on the same thing over and over again, but, he got out-coached yet again, and then, then he would, play Florida in the same Fiesta Bowl a couple of years later, out-coached again by Meyer, Urban Meyer, rather, and just, he just always would, I'm not going to say failed his team, but it just seems like his team, if you unveil a wrinkle or something, they couldn't adjust to it in these big games.
Do you think it might have been the unknown factor of Boise State, being something of an unknown to them? Because Boise State before this game nobody knew who they were. They ended the year 13-0. Yet they were undefeated, but they were playing in the WAC at the time against Hawaii and San Jose State and San Diego State and those guys. And they weren't really all that well known, until now, And now Boise State is a brand name now, of course, but thanks to Chris Peterson and that game. But not to give Bob Stoops too much of the benefit of the doubt, but do you think that it might have had a little bit of fact of not really knowing all that much about them? Yeah, of course, they got game film, of course, but still there was like this unknown factor with them.
Okay, of course, and I can give you that. But then you also have to understand that, okay, this team is from the WAC conference. Typically, they're much smaller, not as physical. So in order for them to kind of compete and consistently move the ball, they would have to incorporate an element of misdirection, things like that.
Trick plays.
And specifically the final sequence to win the game. He had just ran the trick play, the hook and ladder, the misdirection to get 6 out of you to tie the game to send it to overtime. So you have to stress the importance of head on the swivel, keep eye discipline, and then they get right back on that goal line in that play. And the halfback pass, they're not diagnosing the keys, and then the Statue of Liberty. I mean, okay, he scores, fine. But what excuse is there of no one even being in the screen within 10 yards of the dude? And it wasn't like the dude was an Adrian Peterson type. He was old clunker that got in there, and so there's no excuse for that,
And another thing is that let's give Chris Peterson some credit. For you to have the balls to run 3 trick plays, especially 2 trick plays on the goal line, I don't know. I mean, I love trick plays, but I don't know if I would have the guts to do that. I don't know if I could because, to run the halfback pass option from the halfback, then that's something. But then the hook and ladder, but the Statue of Liberty, I forgot the Statue of Liberty even existed until I saw that. Because no one's ever run it, but it worked. And to what you're saying, they got so juked by that play. The whole entire defense got taken by that play. And there was no backside integrity. None.
Zero. Zilch. And you got to give Chris Peterson credit because you don't know if he'll have the guts to do it. Okay. You can face the fact that, okay, if it did not work, I didn't go home with any clips left in the gun.
Yeah, exactly.
I emptied the clip. So
he went way in the back of the playbook. To get those.
I emptied the clip. If I didn't win, ain't nothing worse than losing. And then you still got a couple good plays left in the clip, and you're like, well, damn, and you didn't use them. You know what I mean? So he emptied the clip. So win or lose, you can accept that. You know what I mean? Because you did everything you could to win the game. Now, fortunately for them, it worked to their benefit. But even if it hadn't, you're like, okay, well, I exhausted all of my weapons, all of my schematics, and we just came up short. But this is a nice springboard for us to work from this point and continue to build the program.
Right. So that was my number one game. The 2007, I forgot what year it was. 2007 Fiesta Bowl.
Yes.
2007 Fiesta Bowl, Boise State wins 43-42 in overtime. So what was your number one game, Chuck?
Okay, well, my number one game, before I get to that, I'll do similar to you. Give a quick recap of what I had.
Okay.
1984, Florida Citrus, we had Florida State versus Georgia. Number 4, LSU Iowa. The Nick Saban game, 2005 Capital One Bowl. Number 3, 1988 Sugar Bowl, Auburn versus Syracuse. The tie game. Number 2, the coming out party of Vince Young, Michigan, Texas, 2005 Rose. And my number one game, kind of following a similar theme, is the 1994 Orange Bowl, Nebraska versus Florida State.
Ooh, that was a classic. Oh, my God. Dr. Tom Osborne, Bobby Bowden. That's a classic.
So, Florida State, they went to the season. Went to the game, rather. Ranked 11-1, ranked first. They were featuring the following players: Heisman Trophy winner Charlie Ward, Derek Brooks, Warwick Dunn, Kez McCorvey, William Floyd, William Barnum Floyd. Then Nebraska ranked number 2, 11-0. And of course, Florida State was coached by the aforementioned legendary Bobby Bowden. Nebraska ranked 2nd, 11-0. They're featuring a quarterback by the name of Tommy Frazier. They're Trev Alberts, a freshman, Lawrence Phillips. They were led by legendary coach Tom Osborne. Going into the game, Florida State was favored by 17.5 points going into the game. Now, through the years, you and I have talked about some of this. the Orange Bowl, the Miami Orange Bowl through the years had been a house of horrors for Nebraska, starting with the 83 Nebraska game in which they lost against Bernie Kosar and Schellenberger in Miami. We covered that. But then they also played Florida State and Miami like another combined 4 times, didn't come within 20 in any game, because what would always befall them each and every time would be the way their offense is set up, their power running game.
Yeah.
They were so deficient in terms of speed defensively, they would fall behind to these big deficits. So, and then the manner in which the offense, even though effective, it wasn't designed to come back from big deficits. So that spelled their impending doom. So, being the great coach that Tom Osborne is, he made a few tweaks. What he began to do is recruit more speed. Like I talked about in previous episodes. He would bring in guys that he may have recruited them as a DB or safety. He gets them there, bulks them up 10 to 20 pounds. They become linebackers. Conversely, Trev Albert started out as a linebacker. Beat them up, moved them to DN. So that would improve the team's speed. So they were favored by 17.5 points. That was a very important caveat I just gave. So, starting out, first quarter, Florida State was number 1 offense in the nation, averaging 45 a game. First quarter, zilch. Nebraska on them. Second quarter, Scott Bentley, boy, that's a name from the past. 34-yard field goal, put Florida State up 3-0. Then Tommy Frazier hit Reggie Ball for a 34-yard pass with the extra point to put Nebraska up 7-3. Then Scott Bentley put up a 25-yard field goal with 29 seconds to go in the half, and they go into the locker room. Nebraska 7, Florida State 6. Now, a key component, Eric Crouch, the future Heisman Trophy winner, ran back a punt in that game. But they called a phantom clipping call. He had ran it back for 6, but they called a phantom clipping call, so they may be up even 14 to 6. But anyway, common sentiment was okay. Nebraska's on them, but eventually Florida State, Charlie Ward, as they had all season, even in the Notre Dame game that they lost, they'll get it clicking and they'll put up the points. So they started out. William Floyd put it in from 1 yard out, 2-point pass failed. Florida State goes up 12-7. Scott Bentley tacks on a 39-yard field goal before the end of the quarter. They go up 15-7. It's like, okay, Nebraska's beginning to enter that territory where they're down nearly 2 scores, where they may be hard to come from behind. However, Osborne's calculations was correct, because what his defense enabled him to do, since the defense kept him in the game, now the war of attrition, because they were kind of shutting down that option and that veer a little bit, but you keep running into them time after time again. You begin, some attrition begins to set in. So now with the game close, the Tommy Frazier show began. Old Lawrence Phillips, he ran for 12 yards, 2-point run failed. FSU 15, Nebraska 13. Byron Bennett hit a 27-yard field goal to go up. Nebraska to go up 16-15. Then Scott Bentley, Charlie Ward and Warwick Dunn with a big pass to Warwick Dunn. He led them all the way down. And Scott Bentley kicked the 22-yarder with 21 seconds left to put FSU up 18-16 over Nebraska. However, the ensuing celebration, due to the field goal, they got called for unsportsmanlike conduct, so they had to kick the ball off. And Nebraska started off like at their own 45 or something like that. So Frazier, you remember the iconic play. They had him dead to rights. They were trying to tackle him. He broke several tackles and got him in the field goal range, stopped the clock. So now, 2 legendary coaches, somebody is going to finally win their first national championship. And The Nebraska kicker, he was he was facing he led him to the 28. His time expired in this game as well. The official put a second back on the clock again, but the Nebraska kicker missed wide left. It wasn't even close. So the wide left usually right before Florida State, but this time they gets the benefit of the wide left and they win their first
ever
national title. But however, Nebraska, similar to my Michigan Texas pick, this was just a precursor of times to come because they had finally figured out the formula to succeed against the Florida schools and all of that. They finally recruited properly, had the proper elements in place, and then they would go on to win an Orange Bowl, win the national championship over Miami and Warren Sapp in the Orange Bowl the following year. Then one of the most dominant teams of all time that we kind of outlined a few episodes back, where they destroyed Florida to go back to back, and then they also got an additional share in '97 with Michigan. But the story of the game, even though they lost, Tommy Frazier some more, and just look at this line for the Nebraska defense. Trev Alberts played with a dislocated left arm. He had 3 sacks in the game. Charlie Ward, Heisman Trophy winner, 24 43 completions, 286, zero interceptions, but he got sacked 5 times. It was just like Nebraska outgained them by nearly 60 yards. Nebraska outran them by nearly 140 yards. So it was just like, they just but the Nebraska went 1 of 12 on third down, which kind of did them in. But despite the heartbreak of the loss, it was definitely a sign of great things to come.
Well, when you think about those Nebraska teams in the mid to late 90s, it's a lot like Vince Young. That game put Tommy Frazier's name on the map. Tommy Frazier became now. I don't know why he wasn't really in the running for the Heisman the following year, unless I'm forgetting something. But Tommy Frazier is one of those names that you bring up today, and it's like you forget how good that kid was. And, everybody knew about Lawrence Phillips and the trouble that he got into and how much of a knucklehead he was, And Nebraska was starting to get this sort of reputation of not a good net reputation of the people that they would recruit, of not being the best of character. But for some reason, Tom Osborne was the one to really get them at least settled on the field and for them to win games, right? But Tommy Frazier was, I never heard anything, at least I'm forgetting something again, I never really heard him being in any kind of trouble or anything like that. He was just a very solid quarterback, especially one of the most athletic quarterbacks that Nebraska's ever had. I mean, you think about some of the great players that come through Nebraska going, guys like, going all the way back to, his name escapes me right now, the one that hides in the second. Johnny Rogers.
Yes.
Going to Johnny Rogers, Mike Rozier, Irving Fryer, those guys that wore that red N on their helmets. I mean, when you saw that in the 90s, you knew that you were about to be in a very, very physical ball game, and that was their calling card. But they were, to your point, once they fell behind that veer, that option that they would run, it's not made to come from behind. It's not, and you kind of saw that going back to 83 when they fell behind to Miami in 83. They had to pretty much go to the air constantly. Now, they had a good quarterback at Turner Gill, but that offense was based on running, and this year, just like it was in 83. But what made this different was Nebraska finally had speed, and that would show up the next year when they played Florida in the Fiesta Bowl, and that really was the difference between those Nebraska teams of the 80s. And then in the 90s, Nebraska would finally realized, hey, we need speed to compete, and sure enough, they did. And a few years later, they're playing for national championships.
Game where I knew they felt that they could win,
Mm-hmm.
and then they went through this game hard fought, and they lost the game. They knew, in all probability, it's a game that they should have won.
Yeah.
And they also knew now that the formula was set. The formula was set to compete against anybody, whether it's the Florida school, the SEC wasn't.
The SEC wasn't there yet.
On each other. They were on the beat up on each other's face. They weren't like, as far as the upper echelon, none of them were there.
They weren't there
Alabama or Florida would peek through on occasion, but that was it. But they knew that, okay, we couldn't be messed with. We were the best. And they went into that next season, those next 2 years, with that attitude. They knew other than if they played Colorado, that was the only team that they were gonna possibly lose to. If they didn't lose to them, because Colorado had Cordell Stewart, and you mentioned the next year the Heisman Trophy. Rashawn Salam ran for over 2,000 yards and won it that year. So they had Michael Westbrook, Charles Johnson, and all of those guys too. So and it was just hard. And then Frazier in that Orange Bowl against Florida State, he literally just took the team on his back and led them. So going forward, the guys knew they had a true field general.
Right. So that's our top five most memorable bowl games. And we're going to take a short break. And coming up, we're going to talk about this one particular gentleman who has been basically a cornerstone of our childhood when it came down to college football. He is literally the voice of college football. And every time you heard his voice, you knew it was a big, big game coming up right after our shout out right after this. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast here on the Sports History Network. And we're back here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I'm Dana Augusta. He's being joined right now by Charles Combs. And we just went through our 5 most memorable college football bowl games. And we're going to send a shout out to a man who I never knew he had as much of a career outside of college football. But when you hear his voice and you say his name, he is literally the embodiment of college football, especially for our lives, especially if you're a certain age. And I'm talking about none other than Mr. Wool Nelly himself, Keith Jackson. Now, Keith Jackson not only did college football, which he's been mainly known for throughout his long career in broadcasting, but he also did Major League Baseball. He also did the NBA. He did boxing. He did auto racing. He did the PGA Tour. And he also did the Olympics. He is credited for naming the Rose Bowl the granddaddy of them all. And he's also credited for naming Michigan Stadium the Big House. He was the first play-by-play announcer for Monday Night Football when he teamed up with Howard Cosell and Don Meredith in 1970. He had that role for only 1 year. He actually broadcast NBA Finals games on ABC in 1971 through 1973 before ABC handed over the reins to CBS in the mid-70s. It was him and Bill Russell doing the NBA Finals. If you could imagine that, Keith Jackson and Bill Russell. He replaced Chris Schenkel and Jack Twyman on the broadcast. He also called Major League Baseball. He was one of the voices for Monday Night Baseball, if you remember that far back. And he was the voice of the 1986 National League Championship Series between the Mets and Astros in that 16-inning thriller. He was the play-by-play man for that game. And he also called the famous 1976 American League Championship walk-off home run by Chris Chambliss against his Kansas City Royals, when Chambliss hit that walk-off home run in Game 5 for the Yankees to win their first pennant since 1965. So, I'm sorry, 1964 against the Cardinals. So, Keith Jackson had pretty much been it all. But when you come to Keith Jackson, it's college football. He's the voice of college football. You know, him and his catchphrases, calling the offensive linemen the big uglies, and whoa, Nelly, and there's a fumble. It's just so iconic. I remember watching games when he used to do games with going back to former University of Arkansas coach Frank Broyles, and then he was replaced by Bob Greasy, and then Dan Fouts. I mean, but when there was a big game on for college football, you knew Keith Jackson was there.
Absolutely, and he was a person that his personality and his expertise and technical ability, and he just automatically elevated the stakes. Yeah. You knew if it's like, you know, live from Lincoln Memorial Stadium, it's the biggest deal. Yep. You know that. It's a big game. It's the game of the week. He just automatically elevated everything, and he just called so many iconic moments. Couple that automatically come to mind. I remember when he called the Cordell Stewart Hail Mary, Colorado, Michigan, 1994. I also remember the call in the 92 Sugar Bowl when they hit Lamar Thomas. He was running, and George T. from Alabama ran him down and took the ball from him and went the other way. It was just some iconic calls that he had, and he was a great ambassador for ABC Sports as well as college football.
I mean, one of the ones that I remember is those. He called a lot of Michigan games, and the one that I remember was the Desmond Howard run back for a touchdown. And he says, goodbye. And he says, hello, Heisman. And I was like, that's really cool. And yeah, and you know, I remember all of the Sugar Bowls. Here I am at Keith Jackson, along with Frank Broyles, here up at high above the Superdome here in New Orleans for this year's Sugar Bowl. You know, he'd do the Sugar Bowl every year and stuff, and you know, it just elevated. It just made the game even bigger than. It was a big game. You knew it was a big game when he was there, you know, and all of the Texas-Oklahoma games that he did, all of the Michigan-Ohio State games he did, you know, he was just, and to me, still the voice of college football. Now, there's a lot of claimants out there now. Vern Lundquist, when he was with CBS doing the SEC, you know, Chris Fowler right now, but none of them could even hold a candle to Keith Jackson. None of them.
The dean.
That's it. He's the dean.
College football broadcasters. He was undoubtedly the dean and the GOAT.
That's it. It could have said it better myself, and that's a good way to end it right there with the GOAT, Keith Jackson. And I want to thank Charles once again for joining us, and that was our shout out to Keith Jackson, wrapping up our episode of the top five most memorable college football bowl games. Once again, I want to thank Charles for dropping by, and we're going to end it right after this short break. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
And that will do it for this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Thank you once again for joining us. This podcast comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. And once again, don't forget to subscribe to the show to get new episodes whenever they are released. And don't forget to like and subscribe whenever you hear us, because that would definitely help us out on the algorithm and all that sort of stuff. And as always, tell people about us. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers, tell your neighbors. Hell, tell a passerby on the street if you think they like sports history. And until next time, thank you once again for joining us.
and have a good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you may be.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.